It began, as these things often do, with silence. A silence so deep, it felt inherited, passed down through generations like a curse no one dared to name. In a forgotten corner of rural America, surrounded by the choking woods and the whispers of a dying town, there stood a house that seemed to mourn its own existence. The locals said it had been empty for years, but on certain nights, lights flickered in the attic window, and the faint sound of a woman's voice could be heard humming a lullaby that no one could quite recognize. No one remembered the family that once lived there, not truly. Their name had been erased from county records, their graves unmarked. Yet, if you asked the oldest residents, the ones whose memories were already half buried, they'd tell you about the tragedy that consumed them, about the secret that didn't just end their bloodline. It poisoned it from within. It started with a man, doesn't it always? He was proud, respected, and deeply religious. The kind of man who built his own church with his bare hands, who believed the land he stood on was sacred, chosen. But what he built on that land was something else entirely, something that didn't belong to God at all. The first clue came decades later, when a team of surveyors uncovered the remnants of a well buried beneath the foundation of that same house. Inside were old belongings, a locket, a child's shoe, and a wedding ring carved with initials that didn't match any known marriage record in the county. And then came the journal, found in a rotted cedar chest, its pages fused together with mold and time. But the few that survived told a story of obsession, of control, and of one man's belief that his family's purity was divine, and that it had to be preserved at any cost. The handwriting grew more frantic with each page, and near the end, one line repeated again and again, carved into the paper with such force that it tore through. What's done in blood cannot be undone. They say the past doesn't die. But in this family, it did something worse. It lingered. When the journal was found, the town's new sheriff didn't know what to make of it. At first, it was treated like a curiosity, an old man's ramblings, a relic from a time when everyone wrote down their sins and called it scripture. But as the words were pieced together, a darker picture began to form. The author of the journal was Nathaniel Harlow, patriarch of the Harlow family, one of the first settlers in that region and one of the wealthiest. The Harlows had come from the east, fleeing scandal and rumor. They bought hundreds of acres of untouched forest, built their home at the heart of it, and sealed themselves off from the world. For years, they prospered. But the price of that prosperity was isolation. Their children were homeschooled, their workers dismissed without warning, their neighbors warned never to trespass on holy ground. People began to talk about the strange hymns heard at night, about the way the Harlow children never seemed to age, about how the patriarch never appeared in town after sundown. And then came the first disappearance, a young woman named Mary Calloway, a seamstress hired to repair linens for the Harlow estate. She was seen entering the property one afternoon and was never seen again. No body, no trace. The sheriff at the time, a man named Reeves, investigated quietly. But after visiting the Harlow home, he resigned a week later and left town altogether. His replacement filed no further reports. Decades passed, and the story dissolved into myth. The land changed hands, the old house decayed. The Harlow name was forgotten, until the journal surfaced again. In its final pages, Nathaniel wrote of a divine test. He claimed that his family was chosen, marked by God to remain pure, that outsiders were corruption in human form, and that if his bloodline mingled with theirs, the family's sacred gift would vanish. But what he called purity was something else entirely, because the more the historians read, the clearer it became. The Harlows weren't just hiding from the world. They were hiding from what they had become. The last entry in Nathaniel's journal was dated September 18, 1894. It read, "The child is both my sin and my salvation. I will not let the world take him from me." That child's name never appeared in any census, no birth certificate, no record of existence, Only a single photograph. A boy, pale as wax, staring blankly beside a man who looked far too proud. For years, no one could trace what happened to the Harlow bloodline after that final journal entry. The name vanished, the property was abandoned, and history quietly folded over the tragedy like a sheet over a corpse. But some stains never wash out, and in small towns like these, stories don't die. They just change shape. It was nearly 70 years later when the Harlow land made headlines again. A new family, the Whitlocks, had purchased the property. They were outsiders, city people, looking for a quiet place to raise their children. The townsfolk warned them, of course. They always did. But no one really believes in curses until they've lived inside one. At first, everything seemed normal. The Whitlocks repaired the house, painted over the rot, planted flowers where the earth had long gone dry. But neighbors began to notice strange things. The way the children never played outside, the way the mother would stand for hours by the upstairs window, just staring into the woods. Then, one autumn evening, the youngest boy wandered into town, barefoot and shivering. He told the local grocer that the man in the well keeps whispering his name. The police searched the property. They found no man, no well, at least not one they could see. But the boy's story didn't end there. He spoke of voices that came from the floorboards, of faces he saw reflected in the mirrors that didn't belong to anyone living. One deputy, a man named Sam Kersey, stayed behind after the search. Something about the boy's story unsettled him. Late that night, he returned to the property alone. The next morning, his patrol car was found abandoned at the gate. The driver's door was open. The only sign of him was a set of muddy footprints leading toward the woods, and then, abruptly, stopping. When the police dug deeper, they discovered something the Whitlocks hadn't mentioned when buying the land. A sealed stone structure beneath the house, like a miniature crypt. Inside were several rusted chains, a broken chair, and carvings on the wall that matched Nathaniel Harlow's handwriting exactly. The inscription read, "To cleanse the blood, one must keep it pure." The Whitlocks left town 2 weeks later. They didn't take anything with them, not even their furniture, and for decades after, no one would set foot inside that house again. But something stayed, something patient, something waiting. When investigators revisited the Harlow property in the late 1980s, they didn't go there for ghosts. They went because of DNA. A local university had taken interest in the Harlow story. The lost family, the rumors of isolation, the missing records. What they uncovered didn't belong in folklore. It belonged in science. In a forgotten storage room of the county courthouse, they found several preserved samples from a decades-old exhumation, bones unearthed from unmarked graves near the property line. The bones were labeled only by initials NH, EH, and CH. The tests confirmed something unsettling. All 3 sets belonged to people of direct familial relation, not just siblings, but generations overlapping. Parents, children, cousins, all bound by the same repeating strands of DNA. The Harlows hadn't just isolated themselves. They'd turned inward. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that Nathaniel's obsession with purity wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. His faith had twisted into something carnal, something genetic. He believed his bloodline carried divine favor, and any dilution, any marriage outside the family, was sin. And so he built his doctrine not on scripture, but on flesh. One of the researchers, a genetic historian named Dr. Ellen Price, spent years piecing together the surviving records. What she discovered left her shaken. Births and deaths overlapping, names repeating through time, each generation looking more like the one before. The photographs, where they could be found, showed faces that blurred together. The same eyes, the same hollow expressions, the same unnatural stillness. Dr. Price described it best in her notes. They believed their perfection was sacred. But what they worshipped wasn't God, it was themselves. In the years that followed, locals began reporting sightings again. Shadows in the windows, a light flickering in the attic, that same window that had haunted the town's stories for nearly a century. Some even claimed to have seen a figure there, a tall, thin man, wearing 19th century clothing, standing perfectly still as if waiting for someone to return. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came from a letter, found tucked inside the back cover of the Harlow Journal, overlooked for nearly 100 years. It wasn't written by Nathaniel, but addressed to him. It read, "Father, the child is not right. He speaks to the ones beneath the floor." No date. Just that. And suddenly, the silence that had hung over that land for generations began to make sense. By the time the 1990s arrived, the Harlow estate was more ruin than house. Its windows shattered, its walls collapsing inward, ivy strangling the wood like veins gone wild. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside, filming with shaky camcorders, whispering ghost stories while stepping over bones they thought were animal. But one recording, one grainy, handheld tape, would surface decades later and reignite everything. The footage began with laughter. Two boys, maybe 16 or 17, exploring the house at night. Their flashlights sweep across the warped floorboards, the peeling wallpaper, the sagging portraits of faces long forgotten. Then, the laughter stops. One of them whispers, "Do you hear that?" A low hum fills the audio, faint at first, then growing louder. A woman's voice, singing a lullaby, the same melody described in old sheriff reports from a century before. The tape cuts briefly, then shows the boys in the basement. One of them shines his light toward a cracked section of the stone wall. Behind it, something glints, metal. They pull at it until the stone gives way, revealing an old iron door. When they open it, the camera shakes violently. A voice says, "Oh my God, there's someone inside." The next moments are chaos, breathing, footsteps, then silence. The tape ends there. Neither of the boys ever came forward publicly, but years later, fragments of the footage were leaked online. Investigators confirmed the location, the Harlow basement, but what they found when they reopened the case went far beyond any legend. Behind that same iron door was a hidden chamber, small, circular, lined with rotted wooden shelves. On those shelves were dozens of glass jars, each containing what looked like preserved tissue. Some were labeled, others not. And on the far wall, written in what appeared to be dried pigment, or perhaps something worse, was a single line, "The blood remembers." Every forensic test came back inconclusive. No human DNA, no traceable chemical composition, nothing that belonged to the living. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have buried the truth or followed it to the end? Because the deeper the truth goes, the less it feels like history, and the more it feels like something alive. And in this story, what's alive doesn't want to be forgotten. When the footage and forensic reports were quietly suppressed, most assumed the story would die again, fade back into the same darkness that had swallowed every generation before. But the thing about secrets is, the deeper they're buried, the louder they echo. And by the early 2000s, the Harlow name resurfaced once more, not in a graveyard, not in a journal, but in a courtroom. It began with a woman in her 40s named Abigail Marsh. She'd grown up just 2 towns over, adopted as a baby, never knowing her biological family. A genealogy test changed that. Her results linked her DNA to an unidentified historical sample, held in the state archives. A match to the remains marked EH, exhumed from the Harlow property decades before. At first, she thought it was an error. Then, curiosity became obsession. Abigail traced every record she could find. Baptismal registries, census data, forgotten news clippings. Until she realized the truth, she was the last living descendant of the Harlows. The bloodline hadn't ended after all. It had just hidden itself inside the veins of strangers waiting. She returned to the estate that summer. Local reporters followed her for a time. A human interest story, they called it, a woman confronting her past. But after 2 nights, the cameras stopped. The reporters left. and Abigail never came home. When police entered the property a week later, they found the house stripped of everything except one thing: the Harlow journal. It was open on the table, turned to the first page, and written beneath Nathaniel's words, in fresh ink, was a new line: "I have seen his face. He never left. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. Just that message, and one other detail. The same melody caught faintly on a recorder left running in Abigail's car. A woman's lullaby. To this day, no one knows what became of her. Some say she found what she was looking for, that the blood she carried called her home. Others say she was taken by whatever was still inside that house. But one thing remains certain. Every attempt to uncover the truth of the Harlows ends the same way, with silence. And yet, if you stand near the property on a cold night, when the fog rolls low and the woods fall quiet, you can hear it again. The hum, the faint sound of a voice, singing to no one. A voice that has outlived its body, its name, and its time. Because some families don't die. They remember, and remembering is its own kind of haunting. Would you like me to continue with Section 7? The final revelation and closing monologue. Years later, the land was sold to developers who wanted to erase the past once and for all. The plan was simple. Tear down the remains of the Harlow estate, clear the soil, build something new. But when the demolition began, the machines broke down. Not once, not twice. Every attempt ended in failure. Sudden power loss, collapsed foundations, workers quitting mid-job after claiming they heard voices under the ground. The project was abandoned. The land was left to rot again, fenced off and forgotten. But for those who dared to cross that rusted barrier, there was something strange waiting in the quiet. Beneath the layers of moss and ruin, the house's foundation had begun to shift. The earth itself seemed to breathe, as if something beneath it was waking. One man, a documentarian named Cole Ferris, was the last to enter. He wanted to record the final state of the Harlow home before it disappeared into the dirt. His footage was found 6 months later. His camera recovered from the woods, but he was never seen again. The final minutes of that recording are difficult to watch. Cole moves through the decaying halls, speaking softly, like someone in a church. He pauses in front of the staircase leading to the attic, the one place that had remained sealed since the house was built. As he climbs, the sound of the wind outside begins to fade. In its place, the hum returns. The lullaby. He pushes open the attic door, and for a moment, everything goes still. His flashlight catches on a figure in the corner, not standing, not moving, just sitting perfectly upright in a chair facing the window. A man, pale, wearing what looks like 19th century clothing. Cole whispers, surly. The camera tilts just slightly before the figure turns its head, slowly, too slowly, and the face comes into view. The eyes are open, but the skin is dry, stretched thin like parchment. It shouldn't be alive. And yet, the lips begin to move. The final words caught on the tape were almost inaudible, buried beneath static. The blood remembers. After that, only the lullaby, faint, distorted, but unmistakable. They never found Cole. The house is gone now, the ground paved over, but people still swear they see light flickering where the attic once stood. And on quiet nights, when the wind cuts just right, a voice drifts across the fields, gentle, patient, and waiting. Because the Harlow secret wasn't buried. It was inherited. And somewhere out there, in the quiet corners of America, that same blood still beats, remembering every sin, every vow, every name that dared to be forgotten. What was done in blood cannot be undone.